right, we're going to call our workshop for December to order. Welcome, everybody. Declaration of a quorum, 7 members present. Brings us to item C, hearing of citizens. Do we have anything? Okay, that'll bring us to item D, consideration and discussion related to the CSISD legislative priorities for the 88th Texas legislative session in 2023. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Horak and board members. At your seat, each of you have a draft of our beginning legislative priorities. If you'll take a look, we did attach these in transmittal this past week, but what I would like to do is with each upcoming legislative session, kind of go through this process as a whole, and eventually look for the board to approve these and adopt them. And we use these as we go to Austin and communicate with our elected officials during the legislative session. So we would kind of like to kick that process off this evening with this first agenda item. I'm not going to read every piece of this to you since you have it sitting there in front of you, but I've tried to capture each particular one. As we pulled together this first draft, we referenced TAS's legislative priorities, some of TASB's legislative priorities, a number of different ones. So if you're familiar with either of those, or you look at either of those, you'll see some reoccurring themes throughout, even though some things may be said a little bit differently. So I thought I'd just kind of briefly touch on each of these. Stop if you have questions, comments, suggested revisions, edits, additions, deletions, whatever it may be. That is what this is for this evening. There's no action on this. This is more to collect feedback and make revisions. We'd be coming back in January for any potential action on this item. So I begin with school finance. It's always there. The first bullet, advocate for obviously increased state funding to raise the per pupil funding or the basic allotment. Currently, the state of Texas is at the lower end of the national average on state contributions to K through 12 public ed. So we would look to increase or continue to increase the basic allotment. Also, consideration, there are nothing in the current funding template allows for adjustment or inflation. There's no mechanism in the current system to allow for that. There's a cost of education index that's built in, but it's rarely modified, or the weight in that mechanism hasn't been changed in some time. So increased funding and allow for some mechanism in those funding formulas to address for inflation. Of course, also with that increased funding, allow for local decision making. Don't increase the funding and then dictate to states how that increased funding should, or dictate to districts how that increased funding should be spent, but allow locally elected school boards and communities to determine how to best utilize that for their students. Adequately fund current and future state mandates. We could probably put together a fairly comprehensive list on that. What I have here is House Bill 4545. We're required to provide accelerated instruction for students who don't perform on those standardized assessments. However, we're supposed to do that within our current resources, and that requires a lot of extra time and effort for our campuses, our administrators, and our teachers to provide that accelerated instruction. The accelerated instruction is a good thing, but we're having to do it within the current resources that we have available. So that's a perfect example. Another is requiring full-day pre-K. However, pre-K is funded at half an ADA, so it's half funded, but it's required for a full day. So those are some examples related to school finance that we're suggesting. Ballot language, honestly, we're all very, very familiar with this one, I believe. The first one has to do with tax ratification propositions and allowing the opportunity to be able to articulate on the ballot exactly the purpose of that tax ratification election. If you remember, we just went through that. We had a very systematic effort to educate our voters because the ballot language was very confusing and it did not allow us on the ballot to articulate to the voter what we were doing using those revenues for if approved. So that's the first one. The second one has to do with ballot language really regarding bonds. Also, on those, we're familiar with that. It requires you to put, it's a property tax increase, even though you may be holding the tax rate in place. So just the opportunity for additional clarification on those types of languages as well. Again, both of those, as you know, we're very familiar with here recently as far as the confusion on the language that those items create.
I'm glad to see those on there, Mike, because I brought that up at TASB, and they said there was pushback from legislators. And so I think keep fighting the fight to help other districts.
Accountability, this one could probably be a one-pager all by itself. But at the end of the day, a more collective, comprehensive system that captures more than just a one-day high-stakes assessment. Something that's more comprehensive. We haven't spoken a large degree on our community-based system in a while, but many of you are familiar with that. Or even what we've spent more time on recently is our strategic plan. But something that's more comprehensive that goes beyond a particular segment or a day where there's a standardized assessment our students take. Something that has the opportunity for the community to determine what's of value, and something that is more comprehensive allows you to capture more things. You know, I think when we reviewed our taper report last, I made a comment that it doesn't, nowhere in that does it allow you to talk about how many national merit scholars you have, or the fact that both marching bands went to state, of those types of things. So a more comprehensive system than is currently in place, and also to advocate for the removal of the A through F system. We have went through this as well. It attempts to oversimplify everything that's going on, but yet it requires a 226-page manual to explain how the calculations are come up with. So that's what we have under accountability. School safety, increase funding for the school safety allotment, allow local flexibility. Again, this is similar to what you hear with school finance. Currently, the school safety allotment is set at $9 per student, so that generates about $130,000 for us. That's enough for 2 student resource deputies. If the state is serious about safety, then this would be where they address that in the current funding system, is through the school safety allotment. Also, state-funded support for increased counseling services, mental and behavioral health services for students. I will tell you that this is a place where I think is tremendous need for all school districts throughout the state. The counseling support, the mental health, behavioral services, there's not a weighted system within the current school funding formulas to address this at all. So anything along these lines would be an added benefit to school districts. Vouchers, oppose anything that would take public tax dollars toward private entities or would deliver that to parents with no accountability whatsoever as to, or transparency as to how those tax funds are spent. So anything along the lines that would create a voucher system of any sort.
Mike, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I think there's a huge disconnect between that logic of, hey, here's vouchers, and there's no accountability currently. People just want vouchers. But on school finance, the state's going to give us money and say you can't do certain things and you have to do other things. So I think if people are talking to the legislator, pointing that out, the vouchers need to have accountability if we have to have all these strings attached to ours as well.
Well, and I would echo similar comments with charter schools. I tell folks I have no problem with competition. However, I believe that they should be have to play within the same framework that public schools do, that ISDs have to. That's not currently the case. So we would oppose any expansion of charters without them being subject to the same accountability systems, whether academic performance of students or the use of finances. Currently, charters do not have locally elected boards. They are not, to take on debt, required to go to the voters to get approval. So there's lots of things that they are not required to do that are required of public schools.
So on these priorities, is there space in like this area with vouchers to explain what vouchers will do to public education?
There's always space. I don't know if it's possible that that's something we can capture with some type of, as we put this in more of an infographic and grab some graphics or pictures or somewhere along those lines. Maybe a way to try to reinforce some of the verbiage that's being used, Chairlyn.
Okay.
If not, we can look at some examples and bullet point under this. If that can be something we absolutely add to a revision and let y'all look at in January.
I just don't know if the legislators understand what vouchers will do to public education, you know?
I don't think they understand the definition of what they're trying to do using the word voucher because it is so broad. So I think we need to be careful with defining it for them. More importantly, just on a surface level, because, yeah, vouchers, I mean, we can put our own spin on what we think the voucher system is, but we truly don't know what their plan is with the voucher system. I mean, when you hear say from all different legislators, so I think that's obviously a lot of this is a touchy subject, but I think that's one of those we have to be cognizant of, but at the same time, very cautious in defining it for them.
Right.
Putting our 2 cents in.
I think accountability and transparency are the words. You know, I'm not you call it competition, you call it choice, you call it what you so choose. I think at the end of the day, it's about everyone having to be accountable and transparent for how those funds are used. So to me, the accountability and transparency part, like we are, and we do every month when we're here, the information posted on our website, from student performance to our financials and everything else. I just think that it has to be the same rules applied throughout if it's the use of taxpayer funds.
Okay.
I'm looking at my group because I know they're keeping notes for me.
Yeah, and I obviously I agree with that piece of it. I think the other thing with the vouchers that hopefully our legislatures recognize, but not everybody recognizes, if we all of a sudden suddenly gave people vouchers for, private schools, that money would have to come from somewhere, right? It would either be a tax increase on our community or, it would have to come from somewhere, so.
Okay, excellent. Good conversation. We'll flip over to local control and governance. These two bullets, the first, this last go around, there were efforts to really limit our professional organizations such as TAS and TASB to really engage in organized advocacy on our part. So that's what that bullet references, is allowing our state organizations to advocate on our behalf. The second, remove existing statutes, whatever, just a T or no T, right? Prevent new legislation that grants unelected state officials and executive agencies such wide discretion on how to implement new legislation. This one is directed at TEA and the commissioner. I'll just be perfectly honest with that. He has a very broad authority on how to interpret and implement legislation that is passed currently, and we have felt that, districts have felt that on a number of things, curriculum options and those types of things.
I appreciate the unelected piece because until we went to the TASB convention, I was shocked. I mean, you have the State Board of Education, which is very diverse, both from their districts and their ideologies, voting 15-0, and then the commissioner who wasn't elected and isn't accountable to anybody,
He is accountable to one person.
One person, yeah.
Yes. So really, this is to just ensure that the authority of the commissioner and the agency is something to be cognizant of. The last one, recruitment and retention. This one kind of like accountability could go on for some time. But efforts to elevate the profession in whatever form or fashion possible. Fewer young people are entering our profession currently. I know the agency has a teacher vacancy task force. I'll be very interested to see what recommendations come out of that. But those efforts to motivate folks to enter our profession, the next generation of educators. Increasing educator and staff compensation, I guess that really comes along the lines of funding on the front side, but to stay competitive amongst or against other professions. Improve employee health and retirement benefits. We just walked away from TRS Active Care. It is being propped up now because of a significant amount of dollars from ESSER funds that have been put into that to hold their premiums. I have no idea what's going to happen after those funds run out. So a concerted effort to truly do something with health benefits for educators. Something like ERS would be very interesting that everyone else receives as opposed to TRS, and of course the retirement benefits as well. There's no mechanism in that for inflation either, other than periodically retirees receive a 13th check, but there's really no cost of living adjustment built into those calculations. Decrease the burdensome mandates, increase educator workload. You've heard this one probably before or from teachers. I'll give you a perfect example. Reading academies, not that it's not a good thing, but it places an incredible strain on our people's times. And then it takes resource. We ended up providing a stipend as teachers finish that. So again, another almost unfunded mandate that becomes very burdensome on people's time. Increase the state support of teacher retirement system pension and ensure it remains solvent. So I went through those fairly quickly. Those of you that have been through this before a lot seem like some don't ever change or they stay the same. But I will also tell you that as you look at these that other folks are looking at or adopting, whether it's professional organizations or school districts, the themes are very similar. We did this with the chamber, the Legislative Action Committee, so the different entities, the cities, the counties, the school districts are all working for the chamber to pull together a legislative action plan to have in place. And there were lots of common themes, ballot language, for example, that everyone wrestles with, local control and governments. So you see a lot of these overlap regardless of the entity. So I'm going to stop feedback or adjustments or edits and again, we're not, no particular action tonight. This was more to have the conversation.
I think it's a wonderful list, and you're right. I mean, it lines up a lot with what the TASB Advocacy Council came up with. The one that I don't explicitly see on there, and I don't know exactly how, if it would be worded, is the discussion right now of the budget surplus, right? The $27 billion. And I mean, our leaders, state leaders are saying that they're going to give that back as tax cuts. But that is a potentially temporary amount of money, right? It's a one-time year amount of budget excess. And the fact that if they do that, how is it going to be sustainable, right? So I'm somehow making sure that our legislators understand that, because obviously we know the biggest chunk of our local taxes, our property taxes, are our school district. And so can't go reduce it for 2 years without a plan for after that. So maybe that's it, have a plan if there's.
Right. And that may be one we look at, one of our bullets under school finance, just the adjustments that are sustainable, right? So think about some wording that we might can work in one of these.
Well, and the other way I'd rather see it is that some of that excess is going to fund some of these things we've mentioned here, right? Teacher pay, increase in the student allotment, which hasn't happened in so long and is so much behind a lot of other states. That's the only other one I could think of, not on the list more specifically. I did want to just follow up too on your, the discussion of kind of how you use this going forward. I mean, some of it's formal, but some of it's informal, right? And I just wanted to remind all of us that we all can use this to communicate with our legislatures and the leadership. In fact, you know, TASB lists it as one of our, I think, six jobs of a school board member, right, is to advocate for our schools and for public education. And, you know, they have their TASB advocacy game, how many things you did, how many letters you wrote, how many legislatures you spoke to, or did you actually go speak in Austin? I don't think any of us have, besides you maybe, have done that yet. But we have both official and unofficial, you know, friendships, right? We know people in our community that we can talk to use our voice to advocate for our school specifically, but also for public education. So.
And Kimberly makes an excellent point. And what we will do, so several of you are familiar and several of you are not. So we'll take a look, we'll review the notes that the crew was taking from the feedback tonight. We'll put this in a more of a publishable format, right? And add some graphics and those types of things. We'll keep it to a front and back because it needs to be, in essence, something that could be a one-pager when you physically hand this to someone and review it with one of our elected folks. We'll post this on our website also after the board officially approves. So we'll come back and visit about this a little bit in January and see if there are any other adjustments and then look for action. So we'll get that on our website so you could easily reference it in an informal setting if you're having a particular conversation. I take these and meet with our elected officials. Of course, I meet with them here locally and then go to Austin and go to their offices as well as a number of other key elected officials from throughout the state. I'll participate in the Fast Growth Schools Coalition. I will go with our local chamber on their legislative day. So there's a number of opportunities for me to go to the Capitol, have those conversations, sit down with those folks, and I always take these with me because I can get it to them or their aide, and if it's one page and there are big letter and they can see the themes, they can remember and process those things better if it as opposed to a very detailed, too much, right? They just need to know the big pieces and have something, a quick handout that they can reference. So yeah, it'll be a busy spring with sharing the message.
Ms. Martindale, along those same lines that you and Ms. McAdams have been talking about, when this is being kind of finalized, one of the things, if y'all could keep this in mind, is, you know, if we're on a chamber trip and we're handing this to the owner of a copy store, somebody who's not in education, somebody who's not a legislator, making sure that, because like any other profession, you know, we have language that we, you know, understand what that means. So things like, I know this is a working document, but support the use of enrollment versus attendance as the standard. You know, what is that for the guy who owns a copy shop and he's talking to our state senator?
What's that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean?
And as you say that, I guess I went right over that one. I don't remember speaking to it at all. I'm sorry. Yeah, that one, yeah. Excellent point. And in essence, for that, when it costs the same to run a classroom, you have to count for 20 kids in it, whether 17 are in attendance per day or not. Your operating costs are the same, right? So excellent point, Mr. Ben, because that is the purpose of these, to make them understandable as much as possible to someone that doesn't speak the language every day. Okay, Good deal with me.
Well, but now what you said, what I'm going to say it's counterproductive. On the accountability piece, would it be worth it to mention TPAC in there? TPAC is the one that we're a part of for.
Correct.
Okay, I'm making sure I'm getting it all right. I mean, obviously we wouldn't just put TPAC because they would know what TPAC was, but I don't know if that would be worth.
Let me think about that one, because while that is work that we've been involved in, I don't know if that would have meaning if I'm sitting speaking to John or Kyle.
I guess my idea behind that, mentioning that, is just so that it's made known that there's already work on a more comprehensive
Yeah,
account.
on a community system.
Right, that
Yeah.
it's already, that there has been lots of work done on that already.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't have to pull something out of the air. And that's the only
Okay.
reason I would mention that.
My note takers have that one over there. Very good. All right. Very good.
Anything else? All right.
All right. Thank you, guys. It's a good start.
That'll bring us to item 2, consideration and discussion related to proposed updates to House Bill 3 goals. Mr. Martindale.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Ms. Torak and board members. Of course, everyone was a part of the ISO training that occurred the 1st of November. A part of House Bill 3 requires the board adopt student performance goals and progress monitoring systems as a part of that ISO process. So with follow-up to that and recommending goals and progress monitoring components are our executive directors that will review this information in detail with you. You do, I guess Stormy will mention, you have a handout at your seat as well. So there's no action at workshop, and these ladies are going to review that information with you. Any particular questions that you have, feedback. However, she will, at the regular meeting, give a briefer presentation to me looking for some action on adopting these proposed goals. Okay, Stormy?
Thank you. So as Mr. Martindale mentioned, this is follow-up to the ISO training that we participated in back in early November. And as a result of that training, we've gone back and done some additional work so that we do have a final copy for your approval of the House Bill 3 goals this evening. So here in workshop, we're just going to go through the details of that and answer any questions that you may have. So I want to just start with this particular slide, which I think is an important reminder for us that the setting of House Bill 3 goals are something that are required for us. However, we can take that and translate that into what is really important to us, which is that goal 2 from the strategic plan of elevating outcomes of our historically underperforming student groups. House Bill 3 is really, these goals are going to be a piece of that. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that connection to the work that we're doing. As a reminder, under House Bill 3, there are 3 main things that we have to adopt, 3 main items. The first one are district goals, and those must be associated with 3rd grade STAR results in both math and reading, and our college career military readiness, or CCMR, results each year. And then finally, we must have closing the gaps, where we're looking at where we may have gaps with student groups and what we're doing in order to make those gaps smaller and actually help all of our students achieve at the same level. The second thing that we must adopt are district goal progress measures, or GPMs. This is basically the data that we're going to use to monitor our progress toward the district goals that we set with item number 1. And that does include annual subgroup targets as well. And then item 3 here includes campus goals and progress measures. So this is our campuses looking at the district goals and setting their own goals for how they're going to support our work toward reaching the district goals. And they'll have both goals and progress measures for each one. So Mr. Martindale referenced the packet that you have. It looks like this. It has a little table of contents on the front. If you're interested in following along with the really specific details, those are what are included in your packet. But I will give you the overview during the presentation. So district goal number 1 actually corresponds in your packet with item 1AI, if you're wanting to look at all the details. And this one is about third grade students who score at least meets grade level or above on STAR reading. And our goal is that that will increase from our current baseline of 60% to 66% by August of 2027. I want to point out a couple of important notes about this. First, these rates are not about passing STAR, they're about the meets grade level. So part of House Bill 3 is that we are evaluating our progress toward that higher level of achievement under the meets level. I also want to note that previously, our goal was to reach 56% by 2024. And since our current baseline is 60%, we have already exceeded the goal that we had set for ourselves previously. So that makes it appropriate for us to set a new goal at this time. Goal 2 is conceptually the same. It's third grade students meets. This one is regarding STAR Math, and it corresponds to item 1A2 in your packet if you're following along. So we would like to set the goal that we would increase that number from 55% to 62% by August of 27. As a note here, our previous goal was that we would reach 61% by 2024. But also of note is that the baseline that we started with in 2020 for math was actually 59%. So after the COVID and the other experiences that we have had over the last couple of years, we actually saw a decline in that area. I will say that is on par with what's gone on across the state, is that there has been a decline in that STAR achievement. So we're going to set our new baseline at that 55% and then set our goal at 62% with math. And then finally, our third district goal is about CCMR, and we are proposing that goal would be to increase from 69% to 75% by 2027. This corresponds with item 1A3 in your packet. Here, our previous goal was 74%, and our current meets rate is 69%. It is important to note that CCMR is actually reported in arrears. So that would be the class of 21 that it shows up in our 2022 data. And because this is based on a multitude of factors that the state determines makes a student college, career, or military ready. Some of those factors were things that we saw impacted over COVID, and it was things like SAT and ACT participation, which we know we saw a decline in colleges really not requiring them over the course of COVID. So that new baseline is 69%. The next thing that we will look at are the closing the gaps targets. Again, this falls under that district goals, that item number 1 that you see in green here. And you will see that on all of the pages that we've looked at previously in 1A, because we included those closing the gaps on each one of the pages that you have in front of you. One change that we'll talk about from when we did the ISO training is our original thought was to set our closing the gaps targets in the place where TEA gave us. They give us closing the gaps targets, and we said, we'll just go with what they say because we have STAR 2.0 coming, and we want to make sure that we're evaluating the impact of that assessment before we make a major change. However, on looking at this in a great level of detail, this is specifically about our third grade students. And in many areas, our third grade students had already achieved higher than the TEA target. So we took a little closer look at setting these targets. Just to give you an idea of the way that we went about setting the targets. For ELA and reading, if we had a particular student group that was at or above the district average, we set that 5-year target at a 6% increase. Whereas if we had a subgroup that was below the district average, we set that target at a 12% increase in ELA. We felt strongly that if we're truly closing the gaps, then we need to be measuring that ability to get all of our subgroups closer together there. And then for math, similar methodology, we increased 7% for those subgroups that were at or above the district average and 14% for those subgroups that were below the district average. The next item, and we're moving on our little graphic here, we're moving to number 2 that's now in green. This would be the district goal progress measures, or GPMs. So remember, this is the information that we will periodically report to the board to measure progress toward the overall goals that we have set for ourselves. The first one, I should mention also, these are not directly correlated to the previous GPMs that we have because they've changed pretty significantly. If you remember from our ISO training, this is where we had many on the list of GPMs, and we wanted to really narrow that to something that we felt like would give us a great deal of focus. So I don't have your prior data, I have what we're recommending going forward here. So the first GPM would be that the percent of third grade students who meet the NWEA MAP growth measure in reading will increase from 53% to 60%. This is item 2A in your packet, if you're following along. This then corresponds with the second progress measure, which is item 2B, that our students in math MAP growth would increase from 66 to 70%. We applied similar methodology here as well in setting those goals, where we set our subgroup targets at one level for those subgroups who were at or above, and at a higher level for those who were below the district average. Also of note here, MAP growth is something that is nationally normed. So the expected growth is 50%. So you can see that we're already above where we would be on that national norming. And so that's really positive. Additionally, I find this very interesting. When we look at our STAR achievement data, our reading is higher than our math. But when we look at our growth data, our growth baseline is higher in math than reading. So to me, that's really encouraging that we know that our students have some catching up to do in math, and we're really working on that growth and we're seeing some of it. I just think it's a really interesting correlation to look at them side by side. The next item that we'll talk about, I'm gonna add one other, my keyboard's covered up. One other thing about the goal progress measures. CCMR data does not currently have goal progress measures because, as I spoke about before, it is reported in arrears at least a year. And additionally, the state doesn't really provide an opportunity for us to track that well in the current system. We are working on a local method for tracking that and having progress measures as we go along. We hope to have that ready soon. It's not something that we have now. So that's why there aren't 3 goal progress measures here. All right, so now we're moving on to number 3, which are the campus goals and progress measures. So this is really exciting for me. This is the most exciting slide that we have tonight. So this is the first bullet correlates with 3A in your packet. So the campus principals and I really spent a lot of time since the last time that we all met and today looking at data and looking at our student group data and where we saw gaps, and really campuses took a very careful look at what they felt like their own goals needed to be able to help us reach our district goals. It was just such really rich conversation. We looked at not only the 3rd grade students, but also the 2nd grade students. So we had another cohort of students coming up to be able to just really start to create some targeted plans about what we can do to continue to help our students grow. So that's just the beginning of that work, but it's very exciting to begin that here at this point as associated with these new goals that we're setting. So your elementary campuses have set annual goals for 5 years and annual progress measures. And so that includes both STAR meets and MAP growth in both reading and math. You will note that campuses set goals for all students, not specifically for subgroups, because the subgroups can change pretty significantly from year to year whenever you're talking about a small sample size of maybe 100 or 120 students. And then for high school, Tiffany's going to talk with you about the CCMR goals. That is in 3B in your packet.
So similar to what Stormy did with the elementaries, I met with the 3 high school principals, and we really looked at making sure that the work they're doing on their campuses is directly aligned with making sure that we as a district achieve our 75% goal as far as having 75% of our students be able to meet those CCMR targets. There are 10 different ways that students can get a CCMR point. And so as Stormy already noted, data is housed in a wide variety of areas, and we're working on getting all of those into one place where we can watch that more closely. But we had great conversations in these meetings where each campus set not a different goal than our 75%, but their own unique yearly targets to make sure that we as a district do reach that goal of 75%. And so that is shared in the attachment in the board agenda. And we also had conversations not only around all students and the work that needs to be done for all students, but their particular subgroups for each campus that they needed to take note of. And we made sure that we aligned our subgroup calculations to get us to that overarching goal as well. And so we will continue these conversations around the work that we're doing to make sure that at least 3 out of 4 of our students meet that CCMR requirement. And that will come in the form of some updates to how we are doing our guidance counseling work and our 5-year plans with students, as well as some of our district-wide systems and some individual campus work. And so we'll continue those conversations in our January principal meetings. But really, these House Bill 3 goals have been the impetus for us to have some really good conversations around what we need to do to make sure we are preparing all kids for their unique opportunities after high school through the lens of CCMR.
The next item we're going to look at is the last page in your packet. It's item number 4. The board also should adopt a monitoring calendar. And so this is what we are going to report to you, the board, to measure our progress toward these goals. And so we would like to report to you 3 times each year our MAP growth data, and we'll be reporting that for kindergarten through 3rd grade, because again, if you only measure one grade level or one cohort of students, then you're not planning forward with that. So we would be reporting that to you after the fall administration, where at which time we would give you achievement only data. And then in winter and spring, we would be able to give you data on MAP achievement as well as the growth and how it correlates across all subgroups and areas. We would be reporting this to you in board workshop. Just of note, the more campus-specific data will be reported to you in transmittal so that you have access to that information as well. And then, of course, our STAR and CCMR goals will be reported to you annually once those are provided to us from the state. Just as an additional note, since we will be reporting to you kindergarten through 3rd grade MAP growth data, we also have that data for 4th through 8th grade. And so we'll be reporting that to you as well at the same frequency each time we have an administration, just so that we are monitoring the growth and progress of our students in all those areas where we feel like we have that really great data. And then finally, I'll just wrap up kind of with the same way that I started. Creating these goals and going through this process is something that was required of us, but I'm really proud of the work that our principals and our coordinators have done to really talk about how we can make this something that is useful and beneficial and really pushes us forward as we set these goals and talk about the ways that we can keep moving forward and helping our students achieve at even higher levels. And that does connect to our framework for success. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
That doctorate must have paid off, because the English teacher is getting excited about numbers. Is that what I heard?
I know, right?
Yeah, okay.
I do like a spreadsheet, don't tell.
I think this indicative goes back to the legislative priorities of, like, look at how well our district's doing because of the map, and looking at the progress, be able to tailor it to what suits our district and our needs for our community, not some overarching dictate from one person at the state. Great job. I really appreciate it.
Definitely a lot of work there and much appreciated. To me, it's always one of those things when we look at the STAR data that to me, this is where the testing actually kind of is important, when we can take all the data and put it together and look at where there are places that we do need to get better. And there are some, and we know that, and that's why we have Goal 2 on our strategic plan. So I think these are laid out very nicely, easier for us to see and see the progress. So thanks for all this work. Couple questions. One is, I know on the other ones that came out to us in transmittal, they had where the state wanted us to be, because obviously there's two pieces of success. One is we want to continue to get better, so that's here, our individual goals, but is where the state wants us to be on these, or?
I do, so we do have that information. I'd be glad to share that with you. This is the area where, if you go back to the closing the gaps, the state provides us with where they want us to be for closing the gaps, but they do that for third grade through all STAR tests. And so it will say our ELAR closing the gaps percentage meets should be 52%, let's just say. If third grade was already above 52%, then we set a different goal, because House Bill 3 is associated simply with third grade. So we have that information, but we needed to take that to a different level regarding these particular closing the gaps.
Okay. I mean, I don't know how complicated it would be to have it on there, but to me it was nice to know where we have actually met that and where we haven't. So
We looked at that in the ISO training back in November, so I
Right.
can certainly provide that, yeah.
And also in the higher level too, isn't the whole goal, was 60% for House Bill 3 originally? Wasn't that the?
Yes, okay, let's remember from the training. So the state is it 30 by 60, 60 by 30?
60 by 30, right?
60 by 30,
Right.
where, yes, overall, the purpose of the House Bill 3 goals were that everyone in the state would have a 60% meets rate by 2030. That's correct.
And obviously in many places we're already above that, right?
Yes.
And can I clarify that goal, is it overall for the district or is it by student group? I'm not sure I remember that from the training either.
I'm not sure that I remember that specifically. The goals require us to do third grade only, which would make me lean toward third grade, but I don't know that I can say that with certainty.
Yeah, but third grade by student group or third grade overall, right? Because maybe overall, I think it was overall. So, but our goal too is to do student group. One last comment then, our question really on that then. You said for the campus goals, they chose, in the discussions they have, they did not break that out by student groups. I guess if we're saying goal 2 is to help make those goals by student group, how is that maybe being addressed?
I would love to clarify that. So, because I can explain that a little better. We absolutely looked at subgroups for those data points that we had available. So we looked at second grade map growth, we looked at third grade map growth, we looked by subgroup, even to the level of whenever you're looking at map growth data, if a particular subgroup is fewer than 10 students, it doesn't necessarily appear on your reports because of the sample size, but we can make it appear. And so we even looked at those. If you only had 9 students who were emergent bilingual, we wanted to know, like, how well are those 9 students doing? And so that was really powerful work with the principals. Then whenever we got to that idea of like setting goals, however, for each subgroup, it's difficult because while I might have 9 emergent bilinguals in this cohort, the next cohort may only have 2, and the next one may have 12. And so it was difficult to set a percentage goal, which is why we went with the overall one.
Okay, but they're definitely being looked at, obviously.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you.
Great work. And looking at the grades coming, up to third and the younger high school, and I know the way y'all use MAP and so forth, and is there any change, is there anything in additional you're gonna do if, let's say, hey, this second grade cohort is falling behind? Are we just going to kind of continue doing the same thing, or is there plans for any changes, or?
Sure. So we actually, I had a conversation with one of the coordinators today about, we will continue to look at the data in detail. But we also need to have that flexibility to know that if there is a group that has a particular gap, we need to intervene early. And so that looking at that kindergarten through third grade will allow us to do that. So yes, if we have, let's say if our kindergarten group this year with our mid-year map data shows like we've got some really big gaps there, then we need to rally the troops and get together and figure out what strategies we need to use to intervene both at tier 2 and tier 3, like more individualized levels, but also maybe there are things we need to do with our regular in-class tier 1 instruction with a particular cohort of students in order to help close that gap. So I don't know that I have an overall, like, here's the answer for what we'll do, so much as we will absolutely evaluate that and make flexible choices that will benefit our students.
Anything else? No. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you, ladies.
That'll bring us to item 3, consideration and discussion related to the 23-24 school calendar development process. Mr. Martindale.
Thank you, Mr. Horak, and board members. We have Ms. Parkerson here, our Executive Director of Secondary Education. She'll bring us up to speed on our 23-24 calendar development and work with DEIC. So, Ms. Parkerson, as you transition slides.
Here we go. All right, good evening, Mr. Horak, Mr. Martindale, and the board once again. We have been in the process, as you know, of working with our District Education Improvement Council, or DEIC, to develop the school calendar for 2023-24. And I'd like to provide you with a quick update on our progress so far. So at this point, in our meeting last week, we had the opportunity to refine the draft calendars based on the informal feedback that had been gathered from each of our campuses and from our stakeholder groups. I worked with our DIC president and vice president, along with Mr. Glenn Winkle, to take into account that all of that feedback, and we made a couple of changes and recommendations. And from there, we have put forward 2 calendar options that we're going to gather formalized survey feedback about. And you have printed copies of those if you'd like to refer to those. I'll also send them to you in transmittal. In both of the calendar options that we are putting forward for feedback, students would start school on Wednesday, August 16th. Throughout the process, we had a lot of positive feedback about students being able to come back midweek and get their procedures and routines down and get rested again and ready to go for a second full week of school. So both align to that feedback. The first semester final exams will be before winter break in both calendars. So first semester is a little shorter than the second, but we are able to close out those final exams. In each of the calendars, we have what I have said here is a 2.5 week winter break, but really it is 2 full weeks. In one calendar, they would come back to school on the Wednesday, the first Wednesday in January, and the other on the first Thursday in January. All calendars, we have not highlighted the year-round holidays, but these are 3 key holidays within the school year. So all calendars would have Labor Day, Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, and Memorial Day in them. Both calendars also have early release days before the winter holiday and on that last day of school with students. They also both have staff development and student holidays on Monday, February 19th. That's consistent in both. We also have to be cognizant for our teachers. They have a 187-day contract, and so both of those calendars will reflect that. And we have 2 comp days for eligible staff included in each of those. In past years, we have gone up to having 3 of those dates based on the feedback we've received that 2 seems to be the ideal amount of compensatory time that staff is able to earn through professional learning, either through the summer or during the weekends and whatnot, and trade that out for those PD days. Also, we have included the spring break date beginning on March 11th in these 2 draft calendars. We are reaching out to our sources. A&M has not officially published anything yet, and so should they publish something and it differs from that March 11th week, we will adjust accordingly. So we wanted to make sure that we were clear on that as well. So calendar A is the blue option. It is the most similar to our current year's calendar. We made a couple of adjustments based on feedback that I'll highlight as we work our way through. In this calendar, teachers would start in professional learning on Tuesday, August 8th, and have 6 days of staff development prior to beginning school. There are back-to-back staff development days for teachers on October 6th and 9th. And then the week of Thanksgiving is where we have our 2 comp days allocated for that Monday and Tuesday. So teachers have the ability to have the full week off like our students have built into this calendar option. In this calendar, staff returns on January 2nd, and therefore students would start back in the second semester on the 3rd. We do have that staff development on February 19th that was mentioned previously. And there's only 1 day of staff development here. That's one of the differences between the 2 calendars. In this calendar, Good Friday is a holiday for staff. However, the Monday after Easter, which is April 1st, would be a staff development day for staff and a holiday for students. And then the last day for students is May 23rd, with staff finishing up on the 24th. And our graduation then would be that Friday, May 24th as well. The first draft of Calendar A did have a Saturday workday on it for teachers, and we had a lot of feedback in that informal round, asking us to please determine how we could do something different. And so it was adjusted accordingly. This can, absolutely, it was good feedback. And then this calendar does have 173 instructional days for students. In the printouts and what I've included in transmittal, I just want to point out that you do have a second page, which gets into the details of calculating instructional minutes and how much buffer we have in each calendar and all of that. So I'm not going to go through that with you, but I did want to remind you that you have access to that and how that plays out. Calendar B is the green calendar. It was actually for a period of time, Calendar C for us. It was the third option that we had presented originally, but we eliminated our yellow calendar that you saw previously. So in Calendar B, teachers would start on Wednesday, August 9th. There would be 5 days rather than 6 here of staff development prior to the start of the school year. October is slightly different in that October 6th, that Friday, would be eligible for a comp day for staff, so they could have a day off in October. And then we also have the continuation of that October 9th PD that we've had so often. Staff development, there's an additional day added in November from that mindset of having more opportunities, more intermittent, either professional learning days or days off for staff throughout the year so that they know when their planning days are coming, when their time to plan with their team will happen and so forth. So that was added there. This one has, because we've already had 1 comp day for that October 6th day, there's only 1 comp day in the Thanksgiving week in this calendar, and we still have 2 comp days. Staff development will be held on February 16th and 19th in this version of the calendar, should it be moved forward. And then for Good Friday and the Monday after Easter, that is in a true 4-day weekend for all stakeholder groups in this version of the calendar. And so as you're noticing, we do have more built-in holidays throughout the year, which pushes our calendar to release after Memorial Day here. And so the last day of a school for our students would be Thursday, May 30th. Last day for staff would be Friday, May 31st, and we would graduate our students on Friday, May 31st as well. This calendar does add 1 more instructional day for our students. And then you'll notice a different color here, a different item in our legend that indicates 3 different days that are early release and teacher work days. And so those were added from that mindset from our feedback from our educators that, you know, we can never have enough time to do all the things. And so to particularly call out when there is not already an existing professional learning day near at the end of a 6 weeks, an opportunity either at the end of the 6 weeks or beginning for there to be an early release for students and for our teachers to get a couple of hours back that would be designated truly as work time. That nomenclature is on purpose. It is not professional learning. It is not time for faculty meetings. It is time for them to know, here you have a couple of hours to do your grading or those things that you need to do on your to-do list because the students are going home early. Notice those are also all on a Wednesday, and that is purposeful as well because you know, if they're on Fridays, then everybody at the end of the week is ready to make a long weekend out of it and whatnot. And so we want to make sure that we are using them for the intended purpose. And that's why they were on Wednesdays and not later in the week. And that was a common question that we received from the feedback as well. Okay. All right, so at this point, we are preparing these versions of the calendar to send forward for stakeholder feedback through the formalized process. That will open up by the end of the week this week, and we will leave that open throughout the winter holiday break in the entire week after we return from it through Friday, January 6th. Our next DIC meeting is January 11th, and so we will take that feedback. And our goal of that meeting will be to narrow this down to one calendar option to bring forward for your consideration at the January board meeting. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I remember from when I was on DEIC that this is a lot of work. It's a lot more work than people realize. So good job. And I also embrace change and see change as opportunity. So I am interested to see what people think of this option B. I really like the changing it up a little bit and offering those half days. We'll see what people think about that.
Indeed.
Yeah.
This
I'm
may,
not supposed to give my opinion.
may be more of a question for Mr. Martindale, but if option B were chosen on early release for teacher works, I know you said there wouldn't be any faculty meetings, but we make sure no meetings would happen, because I know it's always, hey, can't we just meet for 20 minutes as a team and talk about this when the teachers really need to be working? Could we make it maybe if it does pass that 20-minute meeting that turns into an hour and the teachers still don't get any work done? Doesn't it happen?
Absolutely. I believe that should we move forward with that option, we need to be true to the intended purpose. And I have no doubt that Dr. Hickman and I will communicate clear expectations for how that time can be used across our campuses with our folks.
That's exactly how I'd have answered it.
And I know the answer to this, but the voting will differentiate between teachers and parents and their wishes. I mean, obviously, I think for parents, it's easy to look and see, and, we end a week earlier in the school year, and check that option. While what I'm hearing you say is that teachers are asking for more time throughout the school year with those extra days and some early release time. So I think, I know we let people vote, but I also think we need to really listen to our staff and our teachers and what they say in that. So,
Thank you.
I mean, it's not just we win by one vote, right? That's not how I look at it anyway.
Right. I think there are so many layers to it, and we will be able to disaggregate the data by group, and we'll go through the comments and look for the trends through the comments as well.
And I'm trying to remember the survey, is it more like a up and down, A or B? Or is there room for, like, let's say I'm going to vote for A, but I really like the idea, maybe for future calendars, of the teacher work half days, where I can make that note when I'm filling out the survey?
So I think that we have room to make some adjustments within our survey to get feedback about specific pieces in addition to just whether you like one or the other. And in fact, based on the conversation here today, we're going to regroup and have further discussion afterward where we can look at it.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, I don't know how hard it is, but it actually, we could have, I don't know if we've done this before, have us questions that specifically ask on these different topics. Do you support this, what do you feel about this? I strongly support it or not, or, I mean, it is hard when there's multiple changes, multiple differences between calendars, just to say, like I think Mr. Ben's saying, right? I prefer this one overall, but I really like this one thing, this one difference about the other one.
I'm just confident, based on all the work y'all have put in, whichever way it lands, I'm very confident it's the best decision. It may not be the perfect, it may not be please everybody, but y'all put a lot of work, and it's going to be the right decision.
Thank you.
Anything else? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tiffany.
That'll bring us to item 4, consideration, discussion, and possible action related to the annual enrollment review and report, FC Local. Mr. Martindale.
All right, thank you. Last month, we had our Zonda demographers here to provide us enrollment projections As we do annually, as per policy FC local, Ms. Strauss will be taking the components associated with that local policy and applying it to our enrollment projections. So we'll catch on some facility capacities as well as also look at comparability. So with our FC local report, Ms. Strauss.
Thank you, Mr. Martindale and members of the board. So you've seen much of this data at the last meeting with the demographer, as mentioned. So we're going to go over that data as it relates to policy FC local. So just as a reminder, kind of the annual enrollment review report. So policy states that each November or December, administration shall review facilities and the enrollment projections, including the demographic report. And we look at it more on a 5-year enrollment trend rather than the 5 to 10 that the demographer does. We're looking at school capacity projections and present those results to the Board of Trustees. We'll also specifically inform you about any schools that have enrollment below 85% of what we call building capacity, or above 110% of building capacity in that 5-year period, because that's what we are looking at for facility use in the future. The second part of that is the comparability of those campuses. So for intermediate and middle schools, we are looking for differences of 15%, anything of 15% or greater in those schools, and what we would do about those. And for a high school, it's 12 percentage points or greater. They're trying to keep it at below that 12 or below the 15 would be the goal, although it doesn't mean it can't go above those numbers. So just looking at our projected growth overall, so for 22-23, looking at our snapshot data is 14,462. That's just shy of a 2% growth from last year's snapshot date. But then looking at the future years, the demographer has us in the 1 to 2% range, some as high as 1.7, and looking at that 5 years out, 1%. That is kind of reflective, actually it's better than reflective than the state, but quite a bit below where we have been in the past. Some of that is birth rates, that sort of thing that's causing that, and looking at the housing projections here and other things. So looking at the elementary chart, we won't go over all of these numbers, but just so that you know how to read them. So this is for pre-K through 4, our elementary schools. So the schools listed there on the left, and the number in parentheses is what we've listed as the optimal capacity or functional capacity for that building. And then the 85 to 110%, that's looking at if campuses go below the 85% where we've got room for additional students. And if it goes over 110%, of course, we're looking at those that the building probably already maybe has portables there, but because looking at every room doesn't always have 22 kids or 25 kids in them. So looking at that. So the green would symbolize if they are below 85% or projected to be, and red would be above that 110%. So you can see Pebble Creek is the only one that's got red in those out years, above 110%. Southwood Valley, it's not red, but you can see the total enrollment is very comparable to that of Pebble Creek, and those are our 2 largest elementary enrollment schools, so we'll make note of that as well. For our intermediate schools, again, you got Cypress Grove and Oakwood. You can see they are green. They are below enrollment of 85% of our optimal capacity. And Pecan Trail is, although it's not red, it is substantially higher in enrollment than the other 2. Comparability on those 2, those numbers, you can see there the differences range from 19 to a little over 22% differences between those campuses. And then our middle schools, 7 and 8, very similar to what our intermediate is. They kind of model after the same thing, being A&M Consolidated Middle School and College Station Middle School being green below the 85%, and Wellborn is not red, but it is larger. And then last, our high schools. Very obvious there, College Station High School is in the red, beginning when 23-24. We've also added this year College View High School because with the changes that have been done there and the increased enrollment, that does affect our other two high schools. So that has not been reported in the past, but we've started reporting that. And then you can see the variances on comparability very close with about 2.4%. So now observations with regard to all of that data. So overall, we have elementary schools. There's capacity when you look at all elementary schools together with some focus on Pebble Creek and of course Southwood Valley just because of its high numbers. Intermediate and middle school levels, again, there's capacity overall for the future. However, there is enrollment discrepancies between those campuses. And the economically disadvantaged or the comparability does exceed that 15% that we would like to have in their intermediate middle schools. And then beginning in 23-24, College Station High School exceeds the 110% of occupancy. But subsequent enrollment, when you look at it, it's between 60 and 100 students over the next 5 years. So it's not huge growth there, but there is 60 to 100 in those things. And as mentioned, we did take into account College View High School when we were looking at these projections. So then recommendations. We want to continue to monitor Pebble Creek and Southwood Valley to determine if we need to make adjustments in the future on these two campuses because of their enrollment. We'll explore options to reduce the discrepancies in enrollment at both intermediate and middle school. If you recall last year, we said we were going to offer some discretionary transfers from Pecan Trail to Cypress Grove and from Wellborn to College Station Middle School. We did have a few takers on that. It probably didn't produce the results that we thought it might, but we had 15 students from Pecan Trail opt to transfer out and 9 from Wellborn Middle School. So looking to the future again, we will looking at reviewing our special programs that are located at both Pecan Trail and Wellborn Middle School that might help alleviate some of that enrollment there. And we'll also be considering options for differentiated staffing, not necessarily changing the enrollment, but how we might staff those to compensate for those additional students. We also, as you know, have the long-range facility planning that's going on right now. And so they are exploring our future facility needs across the district, how we're using the buildings and the rooms that are there, making some recommendations. And that will also include phase 2 of College Station High School, with that being over 110% starting next year. So those are the recommendations administration have come up with. So I'll open that up to comments, questions, or suggestions.
So when you say that the long-range planning facility, I don't even know if I said that right, but when you say that they're looking at the College Station High School and what phase 2, do you mean they're looking at what phase 2 could do for the enrollment?
Sure. Like I said, they're going to be looking at the rooms that are there, how we're utilizing those. They see a lot of other districts as well, and if we can do something different. But they'll also be looking at to accommodate this growth. We're looking at phase 2, how many classrooms. I think some of that's kind of was planned out in the 2015 bond when we were looking at it, or even prior to that. But proposing some of those, putting some cost estimates to it so that we would know what that ran.
Okay. Okay.
When are we going to get that full report? Remind me, is it January or February?
Probably around February would be my guess.
Can we go back to the slide that really any of them, the middle school or intermediate schools. But yeah, so kind of a historical question. I know we've got the capacity and the comparability that are an FC local that we always look at. Have we ever had this type of gap in the number of students, like for example, between College Station Middle School and Welborn Middle School, where the district has had, I know it's been a concern for the administration and so forth, but I mean, is that something we need to look at FC local and see if that's another factor that we need to take into account? Because I mean, just from a staffing standpoint and principals and so forth, I mean, that 200 students is a big difference.
Right. I think that's where that one recommendation is, that we'll be looking at options for some differentiated staffing. Right now, they're staffed very similar with administration and that. So if we don't do anything and we keep those discrepancies, how can we staff differently to help accommodate for that?
And I'm also, thinking about facility usage and wear and tear and all of those kind of things. I mean, have we ever had these big gaps in?
This one, well, last couple of years, and so what you're looking at is fairly consistent with probably the last couple of years at the 5 through 8 level. And of course, what you see at 5, 6 is what you get at 7, 8, because that's where there are true feeder patterns. So I think, Josh, the question really comes down to this, is there is probably only one way to truly address that. And that is to look at the zoning for the 5 through 8. So I think you have to when you think that, you have to weigh that against the other options relative to is it worth the potential as far as looking at and making adjustments to boundaries? And that's a difficult, that can become difficult for a community. And so I think you have to weigh those things out. I agree there are times where I wrestle with this, and then I think about the process, and that concerns me just as much, to be quite honest with you.
And I think you're absolutely right. But it's, I mean, 20.
Yeah, it's a couple,
Yeah, you look at
300.
numbers.
Where I start, look at the enrollment. At the 7, 8, obviously there are implications too with extracurriculars. You have one middle school that has almost 900 kids and they could field 4 teams, and you have another one that has several hundred less and they can field a couple of teams, whatever it may be.
And your
or maybe in band also, and those types of things. So that's something that, I wrestle with as well. I think this is one where we have to take a look at it each year and probably ask ourselves exactly this same question. I don't know. I would rather consider becoming more stringent on some other things before I consider taking the community through such a process.
And I agree, and I appreciate that y'all have thought about other options and ways to handle this. Just as a board, I'll go ahead and pick up the hot potato. This may be something that next year, the year after, the board needs to really take a look at. Because when you've got a 300 student difference between the 2 middle schools, that's a big deal.
I agree, and I think 5th and 6th is even a little worse, right? Or
Maybe
the other way around. I
it'll be
can't remember.
real
One of them was a little
close.
worse. Yeah, and that's a
And
big difference between Cypress Grove and Contrail.
yeah, and honestly, I mean, and again, we're just having conversations, so I don't want tomorrow that, because you saw a recommendation, there was nothing along the lines of zoning in that. So I think this is just conversation for the future for us to
Absolutely.
consider, right? So as I look at that, I really think Oakwood and AMCMS are really kind of like right in the sweet spot, right? I think the issue exists between at the intermediate, Cypress and Pecan Trail, and then, of course, there are feeders at the middle with CSMS and Welborn. So I think if there are thoughts in the future about how to address this, I think you're really possibly looking at those two particular zones and maybe leave the third intact. But that would take some work and to see what different things did to the numbers. Also know this, that it's 300, but when it comes to rezoning, 300 is like threading a needle. I will tell you that as well. So, yes, we have had these conversations, Mr. Ben, and I get what you're saying. I think allow us to continue to work with some other things, like we provided the optional transfer. I think allow a few more of those things over the next year or two, and if they fail to yield success, then I think it becomes a legitimate conversation.
And I would just follow up. I mean, the way my remembrance of FC Local is that basically we're doing what FC Local says, is we're looking at the data. And then you're right, as a board, we, take our recommendations from our administration and we decide if we want to act on it or not.
Yeah, just for the record, this is strictly a Joshua Ben question.
Yeah, just.
And there's no plans to rezone or anything else.
JOSUA. Yeah.
But yeah, just kind of.
No, I agree, Mr. Pitt. I mean, yes, and we do have those conversations internal, and you have to weigh out. Yeah.
And I have one more follow-up, kind of more on specific capacities. This may come up on the facilities discussion in February. Like, for instance, Pebble Creek, the one that does turn red, they are also one of the elementaries that only has the capacity for 620, right? They're small. And I don't know what makes them a smaller elementary. Is it cafeteria size or something? But
mainly it's the rooms and how that they're using them. And so that's one of the things that will come out in the facility study is it may have some updates to that. They might come up with some different ways to utilize those classrooms. I don't anticipate a lot of swing in there because of the number of classrooms that elementary has, of course. If you can gain one more classroom, usually does about 20 children. And though it's 22, they don't always come in little units of 22. So we'll see if there's any adjustments to that when we get done with the facility study. And actually, if they propose some renovations to some, we might gain some capacity there.
okay, those kind of things we'll see.
Those types of things will be in their report.
I mean, and obviously at CSHS, we have portable buildings, right, that's the other way we can address those type of things, so.
And I think this report does something else for us as well. It gives us, it draws attention also to when we need additional schools, right, or additions. So even though we look at this, we know that Pebble Creek needs to be a conversation at some point in time in the future. We see that as a district, we have capacity at the elementary level. You can say the same at 5 through 8. While we have significant variance in our enrollments, there's capacity amongst or collectively with our 3 campuses, right? So that does, so this helps us with that as well.
Anything else? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That will bring us to item E. We will adjourn our workshop.